So let's start with a little refactoring of the layout of our page. Right now, this is what we're looking at. This is what we're working with. Not quite. Hold on. There we go. So there's a lot of things that I feel like could use some work here. First of all, my content isn't centered. None of the text really fits here. It's probably a little too small. Doesn't have a great background. Let's go ahead and change all of that immediately. So the first thing I'm going to do is give each of these little images their own little holder div. So inside my index.html right here, I'm going to surround the image on line 21, 23, and 25 with a div. What that looks like is this. I'll make a little space and create an opening div tag here. And it'll give me a closing div tag. I'm going to get rid of that closing div tag. And I'm going to put it right after the image, just like this. So you guys can go ahead and do that right now. And make sure when you nest the image tag inside the div, that you give it an indentation so you can easily tell that this image is inside this div. Now I'm going to save this and refresh my little preview. Let's see what it looks like. Okay, what did you notice about what just happened here? Yeah, well, first of all, this image now takes up its own row. You see this? These two images are right next to each other. But once I put the hamster image inside a div, it now takes up its own row. So if we go back here, we refresh this, let's see what that looks like. Look at this. The hamster image takes up its own row when you put it inside a div, but these two do not. We're going to talk about why in a second. I want you to go ahead right now and do the same thing to both of your other images. Put a div, nest each of those images inside their own little div. Oh, don't worry, I will paste this into Slack, but for now I want you to go ahead and try and do it yourself. Now every time I do this, I'm going to save and refresh and see what it looks like. You'll notice that now I've given both of these images their own div, and now every image starts on its own line. This is an interesting characteristic of divs, which we're going to talk about very soon. So I'm going to do the last one right here, the sharks with human teeth div. And we should be almost good to go. Okay, now each of these images has their own div, and you can see it actually highlights the div for me in Cloud9, and the div extends across the entire page. Like I said, this is an interesting characteristic of divs that just makes them work a little bit the way we want them to. And we'll talk about why we can use that and the ways we can use that to make our page look better in a second. So I'm going to save my file. I'm pretty much good to go. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to center all of my content in the middle of the page. You see this right here? This div that says class of content? I'm going to go into my style.css file and I'm going to create a new rule. I'm going to select .content. What does .content refer to again? Yes, exactly. The div with a class of content. So the dot means content. Just like here, I'm selecting the header, the div with a class of header. On line 34, I'm selecting the div or anything really, any HTML element with a class of content. But in this case, it happens to be a div right here. This whole div contains my unordered list and this little paragraph text right here, and it is a div with a class of content. So inside that div, I'm going to center it. The way we learn to center things is by using the margin left and right. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a width of 80%. So now it only takes up 80% of the page. That's cool, except when I do that, you'll notice that it's not centered. It's pushed all the way to the left. Now you could say text align center, but then it looks like this, and I just don't like the way those styles are applied. That doesn't give me the same feel that I want. There's a much, much, much better way to do this. We can use the properties of margins, margin left and margin right to center our content. So if I do this and I give them both a property of auto, it will actually automatically center our content in the middle of the page just like that. And that looks much, much nicer. In fact, I'm going to give this a background of off-white, of like hashtag EEE. And that's starting to look a little better also. So now my text is all displayed on an almost white background. The margin left and right of auto automatically center my content in the middle of the page. Now, why does it do that? Well, let's take a look at it. I'm gonna look at it in a big screen right here. I'm gonna refresh this really quickly. And let's take a look at where we're at now. Now you'll see that on the left side of the content div and the right side of the content div, the space is exactly the same. If we take a look at this, say we do inspect element here, by pressing command click if you're on a Mac, or right click if you're on a PC. Click inspect, and then grab this little select an element icon, and take a look at this whole div right there, the content div. I'm going to stop for a second. What do you see on the left and right of this content div? Yeah, that little orange space. See that little orange space right there on the left and a little orange space on the right? Let's take a look at it again. Do you see it here? Sorry, one sec. Oh, I'm having a hard time selecting this. Hold on. Believe in me. Oh, there it is. See that right there? Just kidding, it went away. But you know what I'm talking about? This right there. If you scroll down on the right side of the page, it'll actually tell you exactly how big the margin on the right and left is. It's exactly 142.703 pixels wide. And that is calculated for you automatically when you select margin left of auto and margin right of auto. What that does is it automatically sets them to whatever it needs to be, which is awesome for us because it automatically centers your content in the middle of the page. You'll be using this all the time to get the kind of styling effects that you want. Now, we still have a lot of work to do here, but that's a good thing to note because we're going to use it again and again. So, back on this page, let's go ahead and fix a little bit of styling. Now, something you might notice is that all of my text is bumping up against the side of this little, of my content div, right? How do we change that? Okay, yes, we can start to do it that way. We just talked about margin. There's one more thing besides margin. There's margin, border, and what? Padding, exactly. So we're going to give this a little bit of padding of 1%. And you see now all of my content is pushed away from the sides of my div, but you also see the div got bigger. And now it's taking up more extra space, and it doesn't quite look as nice as we wanted it to. It's okay, I'm going to give it a padding of 2%. And that looks a little nicer for my text. It's not crammed up against the side. But now my div is pushed up against the header. We're going to fix that in a little bit. But for now, this is starting to look like what I want it to look like. My only problem is that all of my images are not inside this white background. So what I would have to do is apply these same styles right here to all the divs holding the images. And that gets annoying after a while. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put everything that's on my content on my page right now inside a container div to hold all of it. So I want everyone right now on line 40 or at the very end to create a new style for container, for a container class, and I want you to copy everything you have right here in the content into the container class. Just like that. Nothing's going to change yet because we haven't made our container class. We haven't made the div with container, but that's about it. That's what you need to do right here. And I'm actually going to get rid of everything inside my content right there. I'm going to get rid of that. And like I said, don't worry, I'll paste this all into Slack in a second. I just want to show you what we're doing. Okay, so again, now it looks a little nasty, but all we have to do to fix this whole thing is to surround everything from the beginning of the content right here to the end of my images with another div. Let's do that right now. I'm going to create a div on line 10. I'm going to get rid of the closing div right there. And at the very end of the page, I'm going to paste it right there. Then I'm going to give this div right here a class equals container. And it should, if I save this and refresh it, look much, much nicer. There we go. Now all my content is centered. It has a white background, and everything is inside that container div. If I want to make sure that I can see that all of these are nested inside the container div, I'm going to select everything from line 11 down to line 33, and I'm going to highlight it and press tab. And that will give it the indentation that shows that it's nested, but it won't change my code at all. It'll just appear better for me to see. So I'm going to go ahead and paste this all in Slack right now. I'm going to come around and help out anyone who needs my help. But this is just a really good way to get all of your code into one container that we can apply the same style to all of it. Cool? I'm going to end this video here, and we'll get to the rest of it in the next video.